I was elbow deep in fish guts on my back deck when I heard gravel crunch in the driveway for the second time that week. And I remember thinking if that woman sent another truck onto my property, I was either about to lose my mind or finally enjoy myself. I looked up, wiped my hands on a rag, and there it was again, a tow truck backing down toward my dock like it paid taxes there. And standing beside it, pearls, shining in the late sun, clipboard pressed to her chest like holy scripture, was Regina Alder, president of the HOA and part-time dictator of anybody else's peace. I came up that path, fast boots thudding, fish knife still in one hand because I hadn't even had time to set it down. Regina, I called, what the hell is this? She turned slow, all pastel anger and practiced contempt. Xander Nalen, your boat is in violation. Clause 11.2, no oversized vessels may be stored on personal property in view of the street. I actually laughed because sometimes people get so ridiculous your body reacts before your brain does. You mean the 30-foot fishing boat tied to my private dock behind my house on my deeded waterfront? Her lips tightened. It is an eyesore. Residents are complaining. I looked from her to the tow truck driver, who suddenly seemed very interested in not making eye contact, then back at her. That dock is mine. The boat is in the water. This isn't a flower bed, Regina. It's a navigable shoreline. She flipped through her papers like she was auditioning for a low-budget legal drama. The HOA has jurisdiction to protect neighborhood aesthetics. That word aesthetics always sounds harmless until the wrong person says it. Then it starts to mean control dressed up as taste. I stepped closer and kept my voice low. You and that truck are trespassing. She didn't even blink. She just flicked her fingers at the driver and said, hook it up. So I pulled out my phone and called Harbor Patrol right there in front of her. Loud enough for the tow guy to hear every word. Yeah, I've got someone attempting to remove a legally docked vessel from private waterfront property. No, I'm not exaggerating. No, I didn't stutter. That got her attention. 10 minutes later, the patrol unit rolled up with lights washing blue across the hedges and the side of my boathouse. One of the officers checked my deed, confirmed the dock lines, looked at the boat, then looked at Regina, the way people look at a raccoon standing in a grocery store aisle. Ma'am, he said, this is a state-regulated water access area. Your HOA has no authority here. She started sputtering about community standards, but he cut her off. Then he turned to the tow truck driver and said, you leave now. And if you ever come back for an unauthorized removal from this property, you'll be charged. That truck reversed so fast it nearly clipped a mailbox on the way out. Regina stood there with her face twitching like she was chewing broken glass. This isn't over, she said. I smiled at her then because I already knew something she didn't. Bullies get meanest right before they get sloppy. You're right, I said. It's just getting started. The next morning, I found a violation notice zip-tied to my mailbox, not taped, not dropped in the box, zip-tied like somebody wanted me to feel the insult in my hands. Final warning. Remove unauthorized marine equipment within 48 hours. But what caught my eye wasn't the threat, it was the signature line. Approved by Special Session HOA Enforcement Committee. Funny thing was, I'd lived there long enough to know no such committee existed. So I carried that little piece of nonsense inside, made coffee, opened my laptop, and started digging. Buried in the meeting minutes PDF posted before sunrise was one lonely line item about a special session held to address waterfront violations. No roll call, no recorded vote, no notice to residents, no quorum. Just a timestamp that didn't match any scheduled meeting and a neat little sentence granting Regina temporary enforcement authority. That wasn't a board action. That was fraud in a cardigan. I was still staring at the screen when I heard footsteps outside. I stepped onto the porch and saw some guy with a camera leaning off the sidewalk, stretching to photograph my dock over the hedge. You looking for treasure? I called. He barely turned. Documenting non-compliance for HOA records. I walked down the steps, slow boots crunching hard enough to make the point for me. You got a name? Brady Trent. And Brady Trent thinks zooming over a privacy hedge onto private waterfront is normal. He muttered something about public view, but what caught me wasn't the camera. It was the earpiece. Tiny dark tucked under his hairline. He wasn't gathering records, he was taking instructions. That's when I called my cousin Ellie at the zoning office. Ellie had the kind of mind that got sharper the more nonsense you handed her. I told her hypothetically what happens if an HOA invents a committee and starts enforcing rules that conflict with county zoning and marine law. She laughed so hard I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Hypothetically, they're opening themselves up to civil liability, maybe criminal exposure too, especially if they fabricated authority to do it. That was all I needed. I started documenting everything, screenshots, timestamps, metadata, from the PDF, the patrol report, the notice on my mailbox, Brady's little wildlife photographer act. Then right on schedule, I got an email from an out-of-town law firm threatening daily fines and legal action if I didn't remove the boat. That was their second big mistake. Their first was messing with my property. Their second was assuming I wouldn't read. I called the firm, got a nervous junior associate on the line, and asked him to cite the specific section of the governing documents authorizing fines on marine equipment attached to privately deeded docks. He tap danced for about 12 seconds. So there isn't one, I said. He tried to circle back to broad aesthetic authority, and I cut him off. Your client fabricated a committee-created false meeting records and threatened me under a rule that does not exist. If you continue this, I'm filing a bar complaint. Silence. Then a polite little goodbye and a deadline. That night I went to the HOA meeting with a binder thick enough to make a point before I ever opened it. The room smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. Regina was at the front table wearing one of those fixed smiles people use when they think they still own the room. When open comments started, I stood up. She said, "This is not the place for individual grievances." I said, "Actually it is. According to the bylaws, you apparently stopped reading." That got everybody's attention. I held up the fake session record and walked them through it line by line. No notice, no vote, no quorum, no authority. Then I laid out the tow attempt, the photographer, the legal threat, the patrol confirmation, all of it. You could feel the room shifting, that weird electric silence right before a crowd decides who it believes. And then the twist came from a place Regina clearly didn't expect. Denise, one of the quieter board members, leaned toward the microphone and asked Regina, "Did you authorize these actions without a board vote?" Regina gave that classic coward's answer, all fog and ego. "I acted in the best interests of the community." Denise looked around the room and said, "That is not an answer." After that, the whole thing cracked open. Sandra from down the street said someone had been photographing her yard too. A fisherman near the back said he'd had someone nosing around his crab pots. Another couple started whispering to each other with the kind of face people make when 10 previous incidents suddenly click into one ugly pattern. By the end of that meeting, Regina's special authority was suspended pending investigation. And that's when things turned from petty to criminal. A few mornings later, I stepped outside and found my mailbox gone. Not damaged. Gone. Ripped clean out of the ground. Fresh tire tracks near the road. Muddy boot prints leading around the side of the house. My dog Jasper stood over the hole in the dirt with his tail low, sniffing like even he knew this had stopped being neighborhood drama. Then I saw the motion sensor above the boathouse hanging crooked, the wiring carefully loosened, not cut. Deliberate. Patient. Somebody had tried to blind the cameras. What they didn't know was the footage had already backed up overnight. So I pulled the files, sat at the kitchen table, and watched 2 hooded figures creep across my yard at 3:42 in the morning. One carried tools. The other used a dim red filtered flashlight. They went straight for the camera mount. I froze the frame when one of them looked up. Brady. Clear as day. The second man stayed mostly in shadow, but the build looked familiar, one of Regina's little orbiting enforcers from prior meetings. I called the sheriff's department. Deputy Castellano showed up that morning, sharp-eyed, calm, the kind of person who makes chaos feel temporary the minute she steps onto a scene. She watched the footage in silence, asked smart questions, took the thumb drive, then started connecting dots faster than I'd even seen them. If this was directed, she said, we may be looking at conspiracy, trespass, and misuse of HOA resources. That phrase sat with me, misuse of HOA resources. Because once she said it, the whole picture changed. This wasn't just Regina being power drunk, this was organized. So while Castellano worked the warrant angle, I went door to door. No speeches, no theatrics, just one question. Has anything weird happened around your property at night? At first people hesitated, then the stories started spilling out. Scratched locks, triggered lights, missing notices, footprints near bulkheads, somebody checking fences, somebody peering through side gates. Same pattern, same hours, same feeling like the neighborhood had been quietly hunted by its own board. I sent it all to the deputy. 2 days later, the sheriff served a warrant at Brady's condo. They seized phones, a laptop, and stacks of HOA documents that had no business leaving board storage. That night, Castellano called me and said they'd found messages between Brady and Regina, plus a spreadsheet with targeted addresses. Mine had been marked priority removal. There are moments in life where anger burns so hot it goes cold. That was one of them. Then the news picked it up. Local station ran the story. Homeowners Association under criminal investigation for covert surveillance and trespass. Neighbors started gathering in driveways like the whole development had finally woken up from a long, stupid dream. Denise came by that Sunday and told me the board wanted to dissolve the enforcement committee entirely and rewrite procedures. I said good, then asked for a full audit. She winced, which usually means somebody already knows the answer won't be pretty. It wasn't. The audit uncovered thousands in unapproved reimbursements, vague invoices for security labor payments to a private contractor. No one had properly vetted and off-the-books transfers tied back to Regina's office. Then came the biggest twist of all. The county prosecutor traced some of those payments to a man named Everett Moxley, a disgraced former real estate operator who'd been selling illegal enforcement packages to HOAs all along the coast. Surveillance, towing arrangements, pressure tactics, eviction coordination, all dressed up like community management. Brady wasn't the mastermind, he was just a cheap tool. Regina had plugged herself into a whole dirty little machine and thought a waterfront neighborhood would be the perfect place to play queen. The arrests came fast after that. Regina for conspiracy, falsifying records, and misuse of community funds. Brady flipped. Moxley got hit harder, and once federal investigators entered the picture, the whole thing stopped being local gossip and started becoming precedent. I testified in court wearing a charcoal suit. I usually reserve for funerals and weddings, which felt fitting because in a way it was both burial for the old board, beginning for something better. Regina looked smaller without the pearls and clipboard, just another person who'd mistaken intimidation for power and found out too late that paperwork cuts both ways. By the time it was over, the old enforcement system was dead. Residents got refunds. Old violations were reviewed and overturned. Financial records went public. Board actions had to be voted on openly. The dock stayed exactly where it had always belonged, my boat rocking in the water like it had survived a ridiculous war and won. A few weeks later, standing down by the cleats with Jasper at my feet and the evening light turning the bay to brass, a new couple from 2 doors down stopped to admire the view. The woman smiled and said, "Beautiful boat." I smiled back. "Thanks." Apparently she's part of the neighborhood aesthetic now. We all laughed, but there was something else sitting under that moment too, something I didn't have words for when this whole mess started. A lot of people think corruption arrives wearing a black suit and a villain's face. Most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time it shows up with a clipboard, a fake smile, a rule book in one hand, and your silence in the other. And the dangerous part isn't just the greed. It's how quickly ordinary people get used to being pushed, how long they wait before they realize peace bought with surrender is not peace at all. That was the lesson for me. Not that the law always wins fast, it doesn't. Not that power always reveals itself loudly. Sometimes it creeps. The lesson was simpler and meaner than that. If nobody checks the small abuses, they grow teeth. And once they grow teeth, they start eating whole communities. The final bit of karma came clean. Regina was barred for life from serving in any community leadership role. Moxley went down. The board got rebuilt in daylight instead of shadow. And every now and then, when the sun hits the hull of my boat just right, it throws this bright, hard flash across the water like a badge. No one's tried to tow it since. So here's the question I keep coming back to. When does protecting the community turn into straight-up abuse of power, and how far should somebody be allowed to go before the law calls it what it is? Tell me what you think in the comments. Who was right? Who was wrong? And have you ever dealt with an HOA, a boss, a neighbor, or anybody else who confused authority with ownership over your life?
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video. Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.